My name is Danny Townsend. I'm 29 years old. This happened just last October, in the thick forests of Hickory Run State Park, near Whitehaven, Pennsylvania. If I close my eyes, I can still feel the crisp autumn wind on my face, smell that decaying leaf scent in my nostrils, and hear the unnerving hush that fell over the campground each night. But maybe I should backtrack and start at the beginning, before I knew that my curiosity, my longing for adventure, would fling me into a nightmare I'd never forget. I'd been planning the trip for weeks along with 3 friends, Ethan, Leah, and Josh. We all lived in or near Allentown and had grown tired of the usual weekend hangouts, bars, bowling alleys, and the occasional movie night. The leaves were turning deep shades of orange and red, and the crisp air practically begged for a camping excursion. We had an RV at our disposal, an older model that Ethan's uncle rarely used, and the plan was to drive out to Hickory Run State Park for a 3-day weekend of hiking, campfires, and photo shoots. We'd roast marshmallows under the stars and trade ghost stories late into the night. At least that was the dream. I have to admit, I was probably the biggest cheerleader of the bunch. As a passionate photographer, I wanted to capture the ephemeral moment when fall bursts into full color. I always yearned for that perfect shot. My motto was, if you don't chase what excites you, you'll regret it forever. Little did I know this chase would lead me somewhere horrifyingly dark. To set the stage, let me introduce everyone properly. Me, Danny Townsend, 29. I'm independent, adventurous, and not easily scared. I've always had a skeptical side when it comes to ghosts or the supernatural, but I also love a good scare, especially around Halloween. Ethan Walters, 30. He's meticulous and cautious, a born planner who hates surprises. He insisted we follow marked trails and abide by every safety rule in the book. If there's a gear checklist, Ethan's the one making it. Leah Matthews, 28. She's the adventurous spark, always eager to take the road less traveled. Loud, energetic, and sometimes a little reckless, Leah thrives on new experiences, particularly if someone warns her not to do something. Joshua, Josh, Clark, 29. Easygoing, friendly, and someone who hates conflict. Whenever Leah and Ethan butted heads, and that happened more often than I'd like, Josh tried to steer us back to calm waters. We set out early on a Friday morning, the sky gray and a bit foreboding. The drive to Hickory Run took around an hour and a half. The roads wound through patchworks of farmland, old barns and leaf-strewn hills. Inside the RV, we chatted excitedly about which trails we'd explore first. Hickory Run is famous for Boulder Field, an entire expanse of large rocks, left behind by an ancient glacier, and the Shades of Death Trail, a narrow walkway winding through dark hemlock groves and along a creek. That name alone made Leah's eyes sparkle with mischief. We arrived at the campground around noon. The park office gave us a site number that was fairly secluded, perfect for an authentic nature experience. Tall pines and leafy maples towered all around, their branches forming a shadowy canopy that occasionally let the sun poke through. The temperatures had been dropping fast lately, and the light wind carried the scent of damp earth. It felt as though we'd set foot in a fairy tale forest, vibrant and magical. But something about the place weighed on me. I can't pinpoint if it was the depth of the silence whenever the breeze died, or the way the shadows fell in unnatural angles between the trees. I chalked it up to nerves. After all, it had been a while since I'd truly camped out in nature. We parked and set up. The RV's electrical system had a small generator. It was one of those older gas-guzzling contraptions that clanked and rattled whenever it was turned on. Ethan tried it, and for a moment, it worked fine, enough to power the interior lights and a space heater anyway. Then, with a theatrical sputter, it died. He tried starting it again, got it to turn over, but we all agreed it didn't sound healthy. Not a big deal, Leah said, tossing her coppery hair over her shoulder. We have flashlights, battery lanterns, and blankets. It's not like we're going to freeze to death tonight. Ethan gave her a withering look. It's October. Nights can dip below 40 this time of year. And that's if it doesn't rain. I quickly offered a compromise. We can bundle up if it gets cold. The RV's battery can power the overhead lights a little while, right? We decided to leave it for the time being. We'd worry about the generator later if it became necessary. With the minimal chores done, we started off on our first short hike near the campground. The trail was scenic, lined with tall trees shedding bright orange leaves. I snapped photos of Leah and Josh goofing off, picking up handfuls of leaves and tossing them into the air. Ethan walked ahead, occasionally glancing back to check that nobody twisted an ankle. He was the picture of vigilance. But only half a mile in, we noticed something peculiar. The forest was nearly silent. Few birds chirped, and I didn't see the usual scattering of squirrels or chipmunks you'd expect in a wooded area. Leah made a remark that maybe it was a quiet day for wildlife. To be honest, it gave me goosebumps. We circled back to the RV by evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in purple and burnt orange. Our campsite looked inviting under the golden light, with chairs set up and a circle of stones ready for a campfire. Josh volunteered to gather wood. He wandered off into the trees with a small hatchet, whistling a tune, something folk-like that echoed in the hush. About 20 minutes later, when he returned, he had plenty of branches in tow, but he looked a bit unsettled. "You okay?" I asked, noticing how his eyes flicked around. "I thought I heard something," he said quietly. "Like chanting. Might have just been the wind." A nervous laugh. "Anyway, got wood." His mention of chanting dug under my skin, but I wasn't about to worry everyone over one stray noise. We set up the fire, lit it, and soon bright flames crackled and danced in the night air. The temperature dipped quickly once the sun fully set, so we scooted our chairs closer to the warmth. Flickers of orange and red light reflected on Ethan's and Leah's faces. I took a few photos, though they all turned out grainy in the low light. An hour later, the moon rose, and a hush fell over our group. The sky was clear, the stars blazing. Leah insisted on telling a ghost story, something about witches in the woods, or a cursed spirit that once roamed Pennsylvania's backcountry. I half listened. My gaze was drawn beyond the firelight to the black outlines of the trees. Nothing moved out there, not even a breeze stirring the branches. A creeping sense of unease prickled at the back of my neck. We all turned in around 11, grateful for the relative comfort of the RV's small beds. The generator had come back to life, barely, so we had some warmth. I slept in the top bunk, in the cabin area. The night was quiet, but I dreamt of muffled voices just beyond my hearing, as though a crowd was chanting behind a thick wall. Once, I jolted awake. My heart pounded so fiercely I could barely catch my breath. Had I heard scratching outside? Shaking off the idea, I forced myself back to sleep. In the morning, Ethan was outside messing with the generator again. "Piece of junk," he muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. He'd hauled out a small toolkit, hoping to fix the old machine. Leah rummaged inside the RV, complaining that half our flashlights were already dimming. I double-checked the battery stash. Sure enough, we only had a couple left. A small frustration, but nothing trip-ending. Josh and I decided to take a walk down to a small creek we'd seen on the map. We heard it was near the eerily named Shades of Death Trail. "We'll be back by lunch," I told Ethan, who waved a dismissive hand. The trail lived up to its name. Dark hemlocks crowded in, their branches blotting out much of the sunlight. Mossy boulders jutted from the ground, their surfaces slick with moisture. The forest floor was covered in decaying leaves, and the air smelled pungent, like wet earth and something else, a rank undertone I couldn't quite place. Partway along the trail, Josh paused. "Danny, look." He pointed at the soft, muddy ground, where the leaves had been pushed aside by large footprints. They weren't boot prints. Each indentation was elongated, almost like a human foot, but with claw marks at the tips. I leaned in. "Bear, maybe," I whispered, though I was unconvinced. He shook his head. Not any bear prints I've seen before. A chill raced along my arms. Let's just keep an eye out. Maybe it's some local wildlife we're not familiar with. We forged ahead until we reached the creek, babbling softly over stones. I'd taken only a few steps on the rocky bank when I spotted something that sent goosebumps over my entire body. Bits of coarse, dark fur stuck to a tree trunk, as if something enormous had rubbed against it. Unsettled, we didn't linger. We hastened back to camp. Leah and Ethan were mid-argument when Josh and I emerged from the woods. "You want to go off trail?" Ethan was saying, arms crossed. "Are you out of your mind? It's not just unsafe, it's irresponsible." Leah rolled her eyes. "Chill, Dad. I saw a path on a local blog that leads to a scenic overlook. It's not in the official guide, but that's the point. It's untouched. Perfect for photography. Danny'll love it, right?" I gulped. Leah, we found some weird footprints. Maybe it's not the best idea to wander off, Mark." "Footprints? Of what?" Josh and I exchanged glances. "Hard to say," he murmured. "Not exactly human, not exactly bear." "Well," she said, flipping her hair back, "that's interesting. All the more reason to check it out. Maybe we'll discover a new species." Her tone was half mocking, but an undercurrent of genuine thrill shimmered there. Ethan refused outright. "I'd rather we stick to the main trails, like the route to Boulder Field." That was the plan all along. Tension spiked in the air again, and the two of them glared at each other. Josh and I quickly intervened, suggesting we compromise by spending half the day on a marked trail and seeing how we felt afterward. The rest of the day we trekked to Boulder Field, a wide expanse of massive rocks strewn across the landscape. The sight was impressive, and for a time it helped me forget the uneasy footprints from earlier. The four of us hopped from boulder to boulder, snapping photos and joking about who had the best balance. Yet in the back of my mind, a knot of dread twisted tighter. Whenever I glanced at the surrounding trees, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. We made it back to camp by late afternoon. Our generator was acting up again, sputtering and coughing. Ethan said we'd best be mindful of our battery usage in the RV overnight. Leah teased him for being paranoid, which earned her a withering glare. Tensions flared again, this time more seriously. It was the kind of argument where every frustration from the past few months threatened to boil over. Eventually, Josh calmed them both down with jokes about how bickering is pointless when we could be devouring s'mores. We agreed to gather more wood for the evening fire, but as the day's last light faded, the sense of foreboding grew. It was as though the forest itself inhaled deeply, preparing for something. That night, the wind picked up, sending leaves skittering across the ground in frantic swirls. We lit a roaring fire, though it did little to erase the chill setting in. Over dinner, hot dogs, beans, and a half-hearted salad, nobody talked much. We were on edge, each of us glancing at the tree line. A strange tension had crept into our cozy trip. Eventually, Leah tried to lighten the mood with a new ghost story, but her heart didn't seem in it. The wind moaned, rustling the branches overhead. Then we heard it, a thud against the RV's side. My heart slammed into my ribs. Ethan jumped up, shining a flashlight around the campsite. In that circle of pale light, we saw nothing, just a fleeting glimpse of movement, something pale and tall, slipping between the trees. We all froze. "What was that?" Josh whispered, hoarse. No one answered. Leah's face had gone white, her bold bravado crumbling. Ethan's flashlight quivered slightly in his grip. Slowly, he took a few steps toward the RV, scanning the area. But everything was quiet again, save for the rush of blood in my ears. That evening, I locked the RV door tight and made sure the windows were secure. Just as I was about to lie down, the generator coughed and went silent. The overhead lights flickered, then went out. Darkness enveloped us. My eyes adjusted enough to see outlines of furniture, a faint glow of moonlight through the window. Then came the scratching, soft at first, but unmistakable. A scraping sound running along the RV's exterior, near where my head was. My breath caught in my throat. I motioned frantically for Ethan, who was bunking in the rear, to stay quiet. We listened, hearts pounding. A distinct sound followed, a soft, guttural rasp, like an animal attempting to mimic human speech. Then it spoke Leah's name. Leah. The syllable was distorted, drawn out, as if some inhuman throat was forcing itself to speak. We all heard it. There's no way it was the wind. Leah, wide-eyed, had her hand over her mouth, tears welling. My instincts screamed to move away from that door. Seconds later, there was a rapid succession of banging against the RV, and the entire structure rocked. Pots and pans clanged. I felt certain the walls might cave in. Then it ceased. Silence. So sudden it felt like the world had been muted. I dared not move. My heart hammered in my ears, so loud I was certain it would give me away. The others scarcely breathed. Minutes passed. Could have been hours for all we knew, until finally exhaustion overcame us. We collapsed into a half-sleep, terror pulsing through every dream. By dawn, the generator still wouldn't start. Ethan discovered that some wires and tubes appeared deliberately slashed or torn apart. No animal would cut them so cleanly. Something with intention had sabotaged us. "I'm done," Ethan muttered, his face ashen. "We're packing up. Leaving now." Leah looked miserable. She didn't even argue. "Shouldn't we report it?" she asked, voice shaky. "Hell yes, we're reporting it," Ethan snapped. "But first, let's get out of here." Josh and I silently agreed. Even though part of me was curious. What the hell was this thing? The urge for self-preservation overrode every other thought. We all scrambled inside, stashing away sleeping bags, cookware, clothes. My fingers trembled as I stuffed them into duffel bags. Every rustle outside the RV made me jump. The final piece was to start the engine. Ethan tried the ignition once, twice, 3 times. The engine coughed, struggled, but wouldn't catch. "Something's messing with the battery," he growled. "We might need a jump." "Jump?" Leah repeated. "From who? We're the only ones out here." "We can hike to the park office," I offered. "Maybe they have tools, or they can call a tow. It's only a mile or 2 back up the main road." We agreed to try. We packed essentials, flashlights, phones, water, and a first aid kit, into our day packs. The plan was to lock the RV and come back with help. Hickory Run's ranger station was a short hike, if we stuck to the roads. If we stuck together, I hoped we'd be safe. The morning was overcast, a steely gray sky looming overhead. We locked up the RV, took a final look around, and headed out. I did my best to ignore the eerie hush that seemed to press in from all sides. The only sound was our footsteps crunching leaves. Half a mile from the campsite, the path curved around a small stand of pine trees. We spotted a partial clearing beyond, littered with fallen logs. In the middle of that clearing stood something tall and skeletal. My eyes struggled to interpret the shape, part deer, part man. It had an elongated torso and emaciated limbs. Tattered fur or hide hung from its limbs, and atop its head was a bleached skull, complete with antlers. 2 empty sockets stared in our direction. In the wind, it swayed, as if sniffing the air. We froze, hearts pounding. The creature stepped forward, its claw-like fingers scraping the nearest tree trunk. I suppressed a gasp, heat and cold racing up my spine all at once. It opened its mouth, a jagged line in that skull, revealing pointed teeth. A horrible rasping sound came forth, like a man trying to speak through layers of gravel. None of us moved. None of us breathed. Then it cocked its head, almost curiously, and started forward with a gangly stride. Josh stumbled back. I grabbed his arm to keep him from tripping. Ethan's face was white as bone. Leah exhaled a shaky breath, her lips trembling, tears forming in her eyes. For an agonizing second, I thought it would charge us. But instead, It turned sharply and melted into the forest, so silent you'd think it floated above the ground. We stood there in shock, adrenaline roaring in our ears. Leah was the first to speak. We have to go. Now." Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. We broke into a jog along the gravel park road, fear giving us wings. None of us spoke, except for an occasional "this way" or "keep going." Every moment I feared hearing that rasping voice behind us, or feeling a clawed hand on my shoulder. Then we saw the sign for the ranger station up ahead, a small wooden building with a service window. Relief flooded me. We nearly sprinted the last few yards, calling, "Hello? Anyone here?" But the station was deserted. A note taped to the window said, "Out on patrol. Back soon." We hammered on the door, peered through the window. No response. Leah let out a sob. "What now?" she whispered. Ethan tried the door. Locked. We discovered a side door to a small garage, also locked. Desperation made my stomach churn. We didn't have cell service in this corner of the woods to call for help. Josh swore under his breath. Maybe we wait here. The ranger can't be gone forever." So we waited. Minutes ticked by, turning to half an hour. Tension clung to us like a fog. My gaze kept darting to the tree line, expecting that monstrosity to appear again. It didn't, but the forest was eerily still, as if all living things had fled. After nearly an hour, Ethan said, "We can't sit here all day." He walked over to a row of vehicles parked behind the station, ranger trucks, a jeep, and a couple of smaller ATV vehicles. I guess he was hoping one might be unlocked or perhaps had keys left inside. No luck. As we debated our next step, Leah began to shiver despite the mild temperature. She clutched her arms. "I can't do this. We saw that thing." Her voice trembled. "We can't go back to the RV." "We have no choice," Josh said. "We need to fix the engine or see if the ranger can tow us. Unless we plan to hike all the way out of the park on foot. But that's hours away, and I don't think we'd survive that long." He had a point. I could only imagine that creature stalking us through the forest, picking us off one by one. A heavy silence passed through our group. At last, the rumble of an approaching truck broke the silence. A Green Ranger pickup pulled in. A middle-aged man in uniform hopped out, eyebrows raised at the sight of us. "Morning, folks. Everything all right?" We unleashed our story. Something in the woods attacked our RV. We needed a jump start. We saw some kind of creature. To our frustration, his expression turned skeptical. "Could have been a bear on its hind legs. Or maybe you're confused about—" Leah snapped. "That was no bear." I tried to remain calm. "Please, sir. The engine's dead. The generator's cut. We just need to get out of here." Eventually, he agreed to follow us back to the campsite with his truck, see if he could jump-start the RV. He assured us that wildlife can seem scary, especially if it's sick or deformed, and that we were likely mixing up local lore with a real animal. His condescension made me clench my teeth, but at least he was willing to help. We drove back to the site, tension mounting with every passing tree. The campsite looked the same as before, RV standing silent, no sign of the creature. The ranger hopped out, rummaged for jumper cables. Ethan popped the hood while I stood guard, my eyes scanning the woods. Leah hovered close to Josh, pale and shaky. After a few tries, the RV roared to life, and relief flickered in all of us like a dying candle. I was about to thank the ranger when a piercing shriek from the forest line froze the blood in my veins. It was high-pitched, yet guttural, like a cornered beast. The ranger whipped his head around, eyes wide. For one fleeting moment, I saw genuine fear flash across his face, then chaos. The creature barreled into the clearing with an unnatural speed, that deer skull head bobbing as its limbs contorted. The ranger shouted, fumbling for his firearm. The rest of us scrambled toward the RV. I heard Leah screaming, "Josh! Josh! Come on!" Josh, who had stepped around to the backside to grab something from the storage compartment, was suddenly alone. The creature leapt, impossibly high, landing near him with a snarl. I saw Josh raise a flare gun. Where he got it, I have no idea, and fire a bright red flare right into the monster's chest. A flash of brilliant light illuminated every rotten detail: ragged flesh, exposed ribs, empty black sockets in that skull. It let out a cry so inhuman, it vibrated through my bones. For half a second it staggered back, thrashing at the burning flare. Then it lunged again. I only saw a blur, heard Josh's strangled yell. Leah and I shrieked, "No!" as we rushed forward. The ranger fired his gun, once, twice, but the creature was already dragging Josh into the line of trees. He disappeared into the foliage. My mind shattered at that moment, a swirling thundercloud of horror and disbelief. Ethan yanked me back. "Danny, get in. We can't—" His voice cracked. "We can't go after him. It'll kill us too." "But Josh—" Leah sobbed, tears streaming down her face. The ranger was shouting at us to get inside the RV. He rushed to his truck, possibly to call for backup or follow the beast. Our next seconds blurred. Leah and I scrambled into the RV while Ethan slammed the driver's door behind him. He jammed the shift into drive. We heard more gunshots from behind the RV, then the ranger's voice in terrified anguish. "Ethan, go, go!" I screamed. The tires spun on the dirt before catching traction. We sped onto the gravel road. In the side mirror, I caught a final glimpse of the forest edge. I thought I saw the figure of that creature again, standing there, massive and silent, holding something limp. My chest clenched, and I twisted away. We bumped along, leaves flying behind us, my heart feeling like it might explode. Leah sobbed uncontrollably, repeating Josh's name. My own face was damp with tears I didn't remember shedding. No one spoke about going back. Fear had made that impossible. The best we could do was escape, survive, and tell someone what happened. The drive out of Hickory Run was harrowing. The roads wound through endless forest, every shadow potentially hiding that horror. When we finally reached the highway, the RV's engine sputtered dangerously, but it held together long enough to get us to a gas station near Whitehaven. We parked, stumbled out, and found a phone to call the authorities. Explaining the situation was surreal. I felt like I was reading from a scripted horror movie. We gave them the coordinates of the campsite, told them a park ranger and our friend were missing. They promised to send search parties and requested we stay in town for questioning. I remember sitting outside the police station that afternoon, Leah huddled on a bench with a blanket wrapped around her. Her eyes were glazed, lost. Ethan and I gave statements to the local officers, describing the beast in detail. Their polite nods told me they didn't believe everything we said, but the missing persons case was real enough to warrant an extensive search. As the hours became days, no sign of Josh or the ranger turned up, except for some shredded clothing and a battered flashlight found in the depths of the forest. The authorities eventually concluded it was likely a wild animal attack, probably a rabid bear. But their eyes twitched with uncertainty whenever they said bear. Our story, though outlandish, left them unsettled. It's been almost a year since that day. Not a day passes without me reliving that moment in the clearing, seeing Josh vanish in a flurry of monstrous claws and bone-white antlers. Leah rarely speaks to anyone now. She's moved back with her parents, sometimes sending me a text at odd hours saying she can't sleep, that she sees it in her dreams. Ethan has thrown himself into work, barely looking up from his desk. He tries to bury the memory beneath routine. As for me, I left my job soon after that trip. My photography sits in dusty folders on my computer, untouched. How can I frame beauty after staring into the face of something so grotesque and inhuman? Every once in a while I search the internet for sightings or local lore about that creature. I stumble on hush-hush stories from the Appalachians, whispers of wendigos, skinwalkers, or twisted spirits that roam deep forests. People claim they can mimic voices and sabotage vehicles, feeding on fear. It's a nightmare that seems too big to be contained by logic. I've tried to talk to mediums, spiritualists, even a few cryptid experts. Their theories vary. A shapeshifter spirit, a demon wearing an animal skull, an embodiment of ancient curses. None of it brings me solace. The only thing I know is that it was real. It was there. And it took Josh. I still wake at night, hearing the screech echo in my head. I see those deep-socket eyes glowering from the darkness. I was once the most adventurous in my group, but I'll never set foot in Hickory Run State Park again. The memory of that place is a stain that can't be scrubbed out. If you drive by, you might see the towering pines and the golden leaves shimmering in the breeze and think it's a paradise. It might well be, until dusk descends and that thing awakens, skittering among the shadows, looking for its next prey. I'm Danny Townsend, and I'm 29. I can't say I've grown older since that day, because a part of me is stuck there in those woods. Part of me is lost, just like Josh. Maybe the spirits of those forests keep a piece of everyone who crosses their path in fear. If so, the creature has a piece of me in its claws, forever. All I can do now is warn others. Be careful where you wander. Some paths lead to places beyond human understanding, and sometimes, when the wind howls at night, I swear I hear chanting, like a voice out of those Whitehaven woods, calling for me to come back. I was once the most adventurous in my group, but I'll never set foot in Hickory Run State Park again. The memory of that place is a stain that can't be scrubbed out. If you drive by, you might see the towering pines and the golden leaves shimmering in the breeze and think it's a paradise. It might well be, until dusk descends and that thing awakens, skittering among the shadows, looking for its next prey. I'm Danny Townsend, and I'm 29. I can't say I've grown older since that day, because a part of me is stuck there in those woods. Part of me is lost, just like Josh. Maybe the spirits of those forests keep a piece of everyone who crosses their path in fear. If so, the creature has a piece of me in its claws, forever. All I can do now is warn others. Be careful where you wander. Some paths lead to places beyond human understanding, and sometimes, when the wind howls at night, I swear I hear chanting, like a voice out of those Whitehaven woods, calling for me to come back. My name is Ryan Langston. I'm 32 years old. This happened in late spring, just a few weeks before Memorial Day, at Promised Land State Park in Pennsylvania's Pocono Mountains. If I close my eyes even now, I can still smell that sweet blend of pine needles and damp soil, hear the rustle of crisp green leaves in the breeze, and picture the soft, cold dawn light reflecting off the placid lake. My memory of that trip has remained vivid, both for the peace it initially brought me, and for the horror that later shattered that peace into shards of disbelief. I was coming off a painful divorce, a mutual decision, some might call it, but it left me feeling unmoored. For months, I drifted through the daily grind, my mind turning over the past and trying to find meaning in my new reality. People recommended therapy, religion, or losing myself in dating apps, but I needed distance from it all, so I decided on a simpler, if somewhat impulsive, solution. Buy a used RV, load it with the essentials, and drive. No fixed destinations, no real plan. I just wanted the open road and a place to collect my thoughts. I found the Pocono region almost by accident. A random Google search of quiet campgrounds, Pennsylvania, led me to a website praising Promised Land State Park's serene hiking trails, well-kept campgrounds, and abundant wildlife. The park had a certain romantic allure to its name, an unspoken promise that maybe, among those ancient pines and mirrored lakes, I would find a piece of myself again. When I pulled into Promised Land's main entrance under a soft drizzle, I immediately felt calmer. The silence enveloping the tall pine trees seemed to whisper a gentle welcome. My RV, a battered Winnebago from the late 90s, clattered over the asphalt. The sign read, "Welcome to Promised Land State Park," flanked by colorful brochures in an outdoor rack. I parked near the ranger station to check in, noticing just a few other vehicles in the lot. It was early in the season. The Memorial Day crowds wouldn't show up for a couple more weeks. I stepped out, inhaling the crisp air. It was cooler than I expected, maybe in the mid-50s. I zipped my light jacket and headed into the small wooden building labeled Office. Ranger Josie Benitez greeted me with a bright smile behind the counter. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with dark, wavy hair pinned under a ranger's cap, and an easy warmth in her eyes. "Looking to camp?" she asked cheerily. "Yeah," I said. "I'd like a spot near the lake, if possible, but also somewhere quiet." She nodded, flipping through a large binder. "We have a few lakeside campsites open in Deerfield Campground. Should be private enough, especially midweek." She paused, gave me a thoughtful look. "You look like you're hoping to unwind." "That obvious." I tried to smile. She shrugged gently. "This place can do wonders if you need some time to clear your head." While she processed my reservation, we chatted about the park's best trails. Bruce Lake Trail was a good, moderate hike, and she strongly recommended the Conservation Island Loop for scenic viewpoints. She also warned me that temperatures might dip into the 40s at night, so I should be ready. I liked her straightforward, caring attitude. It made me feel this place was in good hands. "Any local legends I should know about?" I joked, referring to the stories I'd sometimes heard from other campers in my past travels. Ghosts in the woods? Strange lights? Bigfoot sightings? Josie's expression grew momentarily guarded, as though she weighed what to say. "We have a few ghost stories around here. There's an old one about a lost child near the lake. People say they sometimes hear a little girl's laughter late at night, or see flickering lights by the shore. If you're easily spooked, might be good to stay put after dark." I chuckled, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely joking. Duly noted. She gave me my campground pass. We said our goodbyes, and I hopped back into the RV. Following her directions, I found my assigned site in a partially wooded area near the water. The lake lay maybe 100 yards away, framed by towering pines and rocky outcrops. The space was idyllic, a postcard come to life. Had I been in a better state of mind, I might have immediately started writing in my travel journal, notes for the poems I kept telling myself I would write. Setting up camp was straightforward. Hooking up the RV's water line, the park provided a station for that, plugging into a basic power pedestal. My Winnebago was old enough that modern hookups sometimes gave me trouble, but it seemed to cooperate this time. I tested a few interior lights, good. Then I noticed something odd. The water pump wouldn't push water into the sink. I had a trickle, but no steady flow. "Great," I muttered. "A pump problem. Perfect start." That was the first small nuisance. The second came when I tested the overhead lights in the main cabin. They dimmed, flickered, then popped with a spark. A fuse had blown. Grumbling, I rummaged in my small toolbox for a spare fuse. I found one, replaced it, and the lights came back on. Perhaps it was merely a product of an old RV hooking up to a new grid, or maybe the universe was telling me that rough waters lay ahead. Regardless, I was determined to make the best of my solitude. I stepped outside, inhaled the forest-laden breeze, and decided I'd go for a short walk to stretch my legs. Just beyond the row of RV pads, a small path led to the lake's edge. The water looked still as glass, its surface reflecting the sky in perfect mirror fashion. I heard the chatter of a few birds and the rustle of chipmunks darting around. Already the place was working its magic on me. The lingering tension in my shoulders began to ease. I was about to head back when I spotted a nearby RV that looked well-maintained, white with tasteful blue stripes. Outside, an older couple sat in folding lawn chairs. The man, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, looked up and offered a wave. I waved back, half tempted to just keep walking, but some mixture of politeness and curiosity made me approach. "Howdy," he said. "You just getting in?" "Yeah, a bit ago. I'm Ryan." "Martin," he introduced. "And this is my wife, Gloria." She nodded warmly, but remained quiet, her eyes fixed on the lake. "You picked a nice spot for yourself. We've been coming here for years." Gloria finally spoke. "It's quiet this time of year, perfect for avoiding the big crowds." She had a sweet voice, but her demeanor seemed subdued, almost sad, as if some private thought weighed on her. Martin, on the other hand, chatted easily about how the fish were biting well this season, that they planned on staying a couple more days, perhaps a week. I asked if they'd done much hiking. Some, Martin said. We used to be more active, but nowadays, we mostly enjoy the view. Then his cheerful expression dimmed and he exchanged a look with Gloria. Though if you want my advice, keep your eyes and ears open. At night, weird things happen around here. I remembered Ranger Josie's mention of the lost child. You mean people seeing strange lights or hearing a kid's laughter? Martin slowly nodded. Yes, that. People call it the ghost of Emily Parker, a girl who went missing in the 1970s. Gloria and I, we may have heard some odd sounds on our last trip, and it spooked us. We came back thinking maybe we'd find closure or... His voice trailed off, uncertain. I was taken aback. Wow. I mean, that's definitely not on the official park brochure. Gloria rose from her chair. If you do hear anything, be careful. Strange things can happen when folks go chasing the voices. With that, she gently touched Martin's shoulder, and they gathered their things to step inside their RV. I found myself standing alone by the lake again, unsettled. I told myself it was local folklore, the kind of scary rumor that grows with each retelling. Still, an uneasy curiosity took hold. Had something truly tragic happened here? Ranger Josie's words echoed in my mind. I shook it off as best I could, returning to my own camper. I fixed a simple dinner, canned soup warmed on my tiny stove, and then tried to read from a paperback I'd brought. My mind refused to settle. By the time darkness fell, I was half hoping I'd see some sign of the supernatural, half dreading it. The flickering lantern overhead cast dancing shadows on the RV walls, making me aware of every small sound outside. Around 9, I decided to step out for a breath of fresh air. My eyes roamed the sea of tall pines. The moon was up, a half circle glowing through drifting clouds. The lake glistened with moonlit streaks. I walked a short distance down a path that wound toward the water's edge. Apart from the gentle lap of water against the rocks, it was silent. Then, as if from nowhere, I heard it. Brief, almost too distant to be sure, childlike giggling. My heart jumped. I froze, straining to listen. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, then vanished, leaving me with a thunderous pulse in my ears. Logic said, this park is big. Maybe there's a family with kids out here. But I'd seen no children earlier. No telling, though. People could have arrived late. Still, it set my nerves on edge. I turned back to the RV, locked the door behind me, and lay down for the night, ignoring my racing thoughts. Eventually, I dozed off. The next morning, I was woken by a bright knock on the RV door. Blinking sleep from my eyes, I opened it to find a young man with a guitar slung over his shoulder. He wore a faded black t-shirt, tattered jeans, and had a friendly grin. Yo, he said. Name's Troy. I'm parked around the bend. Ranger Josie told me there'd be another solo camper. Hope I'm not barging in, but you got a fuse or a spare battery charger? My RV's battery conked out overnight. He spoke with an unhurried, rambling drawl that made me think of an itinerant musician. I rummaged around and found an old portable charger I kept for emergencies. Troy thanked me, then politely asked if he could strum a tune while it juiced up. I shrugged, stepping aside to let him in. A moment later, he was perched on the small bench seat, plucking a haunting melody on the guitar. Been traveling the Northeast, playing in small bars, he explained. Figured I'd camp out for a while, recharge. But man, this place is weird at night. You heard the stories? I gave him a half smile. About the missing kid? A few references here and there, sure. His eyes flicked toward the RV window. Yeah. Well, last night I could have sworn I saw these lights, like orbs, dancing around the tree line. I tried to follow them, but it felt like I was walking in circles. Came back drenched in sweat, guitar in hand, had no idea where I'd been for the last hour. Strange, right? A chill ran down my spine. Troy seemed earnest. not like he was spinning tall tales for kicks. Maybe you were just tired or got turned around. Probably, he agreed, strumming a soft chord. All I know is if I see those lights again, I'm bringing a map and a big flashlight. I forced a laugh, though worry gnawed at me. After a bit more conversation, Troy collected the now partially charged battery pack, thanked me again, and headed out to fix his RV. I glanced at my watch. Nearly 9 a.m. The day beckoned. I decided to do something normal and grounding. A real hike. Gathering my backpack and camera, I set off toward Bruce Lake Trail. The forest was lush, the path weaving between tall conifers and occasional birch stands. My chest expanded with each breath of fresh air. For a while, I lost myself in the soothing rhythm of footsteps on soft ground. I paused often to snap photos of bright green ferns and mossy logs. It was a welcome break from the swirling anxieties that had plagued me since the divorce, and even the night before. A couple of hours passed in blissful calm. The spring sunlight filtered through the canopy, warming my neck. Near the trail's midpoint, I stumbled on a small clearing where the ground was coated in pine needles. A large rock offered the perfect seat. I took it, rummaging for my water bottle. As I sipped, something caught my eye on a nearby tree trunk, a small handprint in dried mud, at child's height. I frowned, leaning closer. Could a kid have slapped their muddy hand against the bark? Possibly. But it struck me as odd. The impression looked old, the lines faint yet distinct and somewhat out of place. My nerves prickled. I shook off the sense of intrusion and decided it was time to head back. That afternoon, I returned to my campsite to find Ranger Josie talking quietly with Martin and Gloria. Josie's arms were folded. She looked concerned. As I approached, I overheard Martin mention something about someone wandering around last night, calling for help. I stepped up and everyone turned my way. Josie gave me a polite nod. Ryan, hi. Did you sleep okay last night? I hesitated. Mostly. Why? Gloria's eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. She whispered, "We heard a voice around 2 a.m. Sounded like a child's voice, crying. Martin went out to see if someone was hurt, but we couldn't find anyone. We ended up wandering for almost an hour before we gave up." Ranger Josie patted her shoulder. "I came by to remind them to please call my office if they hear something again. Walking blindly through the forest at night can be dangerous. People can fall into ravines, twist ankles, or worse." My heart twinged. I heard laughter earlier in the evening, but I assumed it was a real kid. "Maybe it's just," Gloria's voice quavered. "It's not. Not real, that is. She's long gone, and we keep hearing her anyway." My breath caught. I glanced at Josie, who gave me a small, tight smile. "I know it sounds strange, but I've heard these stories before," she said quietly. "We occasionally get these reports, people hearing a little girl's laughter or crying, usually in remote spots near the water." Martin wiped his brow. We lost track of time. It was as if we were in a trance. I woke up this morning feeling like I'd hardly slept. Ranger Josie looked at me again. "I'd advise you the same thing I told them. If you notice anything out of the ordinary, don't go chasing it. These woods can be disorienting at night." She sighed. "I'll be around if you need me." With that, she said her goodbyes, leaving Martin and Gloria to retire into their RV. I was left standing there, unsettled. The park's natural beauty was overshadowed by a creeping dread that something intangible and haunting was at play. As dusk settled that evening, the air cooled. I decided to stay near my site, cook a simple dinner, and read until bed. Part of me hoped for a quiet night, but a small, nagging corner of my mind was curious. I still wrestled with heartbreak, so my nights often felt empty. The thought of a lonely spirit out there, reaching out. Maybe we had something in common, I thought grimly. I was just about finished cleaning up my dinner dishes when I heard soft guitar chords drifting through the dark. Troy was around, evidently. I followed the sound to find him perched on a stump with a lantern, plucking a melancholic tune. He paused when he saw me. "Ryan, hey." He gave a half smile. "Hope I'm not disturbing you." Sometimes playing helps me think. I shook my head. Not at all. It's nice. Kinda eerie, though. I sat on a nearby log. Any more orb sightings? He let out a breath. Not yet. But something feels off, you know? Like there's an electric charge in the air. I can't shake it. We fell into an uneasy silence. The forest around us was still, except for the occasional night bird. Then, at the edge of hearing, came the faintest sound of a child sobbing. I stiffened, exchanging a wide-eyed look with Troy. He stopped playing, letting the last note die in the quiet. The sob continued, distant yet distinct, like a lost little girl, weeping in the darkest part of the woods. I have to check that out, Troy whispered. What if it's an actual kid in trouble? My heart pounded. Ranger Josie's warning loomed large in my mind. Troy, it might not be real, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. People have gotten lost chasing that sound. He glanced at me, torn. Then the sobbing escalated into a wail, heartbreakingly desperate. It felt impossible to ignore. Without another word, Troy hoisted his guitar over his shoulder like a staff, grabbed his lantern, and started into the woods, beckoning me to follow. Foolishly or bravely, I did. We moved through the towering pines, picking our way with the lantern's feeble glow. The sobbing seemed to lead us deeper. My stomach churned as the trail disappeared beneath brush. The temperature dropped noticeably. Soon we stumbled upon a cluster of large boulders near the water's edge. The lake glimmered under the moon. An unsettling hush fell. A moment earlier, the sobbing had been close. But now, silence. Hello? Troy called, voice echoing. Is someone here? Are you hurt? No response. My heart hammered in my chest. A breeze blew, carrying the faint smell of wet leaves and decay. I peered around the boulders, shining my flashlight. No sign of a person or child, just still water, lapping gently at the shore. Suddenly, Troy gasped. Look! He pointed across the water. 4 or 5 small glowing orbs hovered just above the lake's surface, flickering in and out like fading stars. They drifted lazily, forming no pattern I recognized. I felt my hair stand on end. Troy took a shaky step forward as though entranced. From behind me came a soft voice, a child's whisper. Help me! I spun around, shining the flashlight wildly. Nothing. Troy muttered. I heard it too. Before I could stop him, he scrambled over a low rock, aiming to cross a narrow ledge. His lantern wobbled in his hand, and in that moment, the orbs blinked out. My flashlight revealed only empty lake surface. A sense of dread swelled in my chest. Troy, let's go back, I urged. We're going to get lost, or worse. He turned around, face pale. Maybe you're right. This place... He trailed off, voice shaking. That's when we both heard the splash. A single resonant sound as if someone slipped beneath the surface of the lake. We rushed to the water's edge, adrenaline surging. The lake rippled, but under the moonlight, we saw no thrashing figure, no sign of a child or anything else. Only deep, dark water returning to stillness. We stared, stunned and trembling. Minutes ticked by. The sobbing didn't return. Eventually, we found our way back to the main path and then our campsites. Neither of us spoke of what we'd seen, partly because we couldn't articulate it, partly because it chilled us to the bone. I barely slept that night. Vague nightmares plagued me. A drowning child, muddy handprints on the walls, a watery figure beckoning from the shadows. When dawn finally came, I stumbled out of the RV, unsteady. I decided I needed answers. My curiosity was no longer mild. It was urgent. If I stayed here, I had to know the truth behind whatever was happening. I drove the short distance to the park office, hoping I'd catch Ranger Josie. She was there, sorting pamphlets at a small desk. I said a quick hello, and her concerned expression asked more questions than words could. I explained everything. The sobbing, the orbs, the splash. I expected her to dismiss it as hysteria or a trick of the night, but she didn't. Instead, she sighed, taking a seat. Look, between you and me, I've heard some version of that story from quite a few campers over the years. Some see lights, others hear laughter or sobs. The legend goes back decades. Around 1974, a little girl named Emily Parker drowned in the lake under mysterious circumstances. Some say she was lured away from her campsite by a strange light or by ghostly voices. Her body was never found, though that part is rumor. The official record says she drowned, but the lake's currents carried her off. Either way, people claim her spirit roams the area, seeking help that never comes. A chill settled over me. Why keep it under wraps? She rubbed her forehead. Because it's unsubstantiated, and we don't want panic or sensational ghost hunters prowling around. Most visitors never experience anything, but folks who are emotionally raw or dealing with grief, sometimes they report glimpses of her. It's almost like their sadness resonates with whatever presence lingers here. The comment stung. Was my heartbreak so obvious that even a restless spirit would latch onto it? Is there anything I can do? I asked softly. To put her at peace? Or... She looked troubled. Some legends say that if the spirit is acknowledged, if someone offers compassion or closure, it might rest. Other stories say it just leads to tragedy. She paused, then placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. Ryan, if you feel unsafe, you can leave. There's no shame in it. A part of me wanted to heed her advice, pack up, and never look back. Another part, stubborn or foolish, insisted I stay, as though leaving unresolved would haunt me forever. I thanked Josie for her honesty and left. The day passed in a fog. I tried to read, tried to write a poem about acceptance and heartbreak, but my mind kept replaying the child's whisper and the glowing orbs. Late afternoon came, bringing thunderstorms. Rain pelted the RV roof, turning the campsite into a muddy mess. Martin and Gloria's RV stayed quiet, blinds drawn. Troy's was also shut tight. Just after dark, the rain tapered off to a light drizzle. I'd been dozing off in the cabin when I jerked awake at a faint sound. A child's sob, again. But this time, it wasn't distant. It was right outside my window. My blood ran cold. Heart pounding, I grabbed my flashlight. My better judgment screamed to stay put. But a more potent force, compassion or a sense of destiny, propelled me to the door. I flung it open, stepping into the chilly drizzle. My beams swept across the muddy ground. No one there. Then I heard the voice behind me. "Help me, mister." I whipped around. In the gloom, partially illuminated by my flashlight, stood a small girl in a pale dress. Soaked hair clung to her face. She looked like she'd stepped from a 1970s photograph. My heart hammered so loudly I thought I might collapse. This couldn't be real, yet she was there, eyes wide and desperate. "Emily?" I whispered, voice trembling. She nodded faintly, tears streaming down her cheeks, or perhaps it was lake water dripping from her skin. "I'm lost. Help me find my parents." My throat constricted. Every instinct screamed that this was the ghost, but a wave of pity rose in me. I'll help you." My words felt surreal. "We can go to the ranger station, or..." She turned and began walking away, her bare feet leaving no prints in the mud. My flashlight flickered. I followed, an odd numbness in my limbs. She wove between the towering pines, leading me toward the lake. My mind churned. This is insane. Turn back. Yet I kept moving, drawn by her sorrow like a magnet. We emerged onto the rocky shore. The lake spread before us in a silver haze, rain-slick and eerie under the moon's glow. She stopped at the water's edge, gazing back at me. Those dark eyes glistened with an otherworldly light. "I can't find them," she said in a small, trembling voice. "I'm so cold." I took a shaky step closer, trying not to panic. "It's okay," I managed. "We'll figure this out. You don't have to be alone." Her expression twisted between hope and despair. Then, in a rush, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. Lights, those orbs, drifted across the lake's surface, circling. The temperature plummeted. I shivered violently. She stepped into the shallow water, beckoning me with a pale, trembling hand. My heart thudded with raw fear. The reflection of the orbs rippled on the lake, and for a moment I saw her face contort with sorrow. She was luring me, I realized. Yet I also sensed her torment was real. Could she truly be seeking help? I choked back terror and softly spoke. "You don't belong here anymore. You're not alone. There are people who care, who've heard you. You can rest, Emily. You can let go." She froze in the water, blinking in confusion, or maybe pain. The orbs swirled faster, casting an eerie glow. My flashlight died. Darkness closed in. A shrill wind whipped at my clothes, nearly staggering me. Then I heard her voice, frail, yet clear. "I can't. I'm lost." Summoning my courage, I inched forward. The water lapped at my boots. "You're not lost. You're loved. Even if they never found you, they never forgot you." I thought of Martin and Gloria's heartbreak, Troy's fear, Ranger Josie's quiet sorrow, and my own battered heart. "Maybe you're searching for comfort in our grief, but you don't have to stay." Her eyes brimmed with tears. For an instant, I felt a profound connection, as if every ounce of my heartbreak resonated with hers. The orbs glowed bright, surrounding her in a swirling dance, then began to fade, drifting upward like sparks. Emily's form shimmered, real, then translucent, flickering in the gloom. Her expression softened into what looked like a sad smile. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, like a figure on a half-lit stage whose spotlight goes dark, she vanished. The orbs winked out, leaving only the silver moonlight. A tremendous stillness swept across the lake. My limbs shook with adrenaline and cold, but an unburdened calm settled in my chest, as if the air itself sighed in relief. I'm not sure how long I stood there in the shallows, the water chilling my feet. Eventually, I staggered back to shore, back to my RV. The night was quiet, the drizzle gone. In the distance, a single loon cried across the lake, its mournful call echoing in the darkness. My mind raced to process the impossibility of what I'd just witnessed. When dawn came, I barely slept, but my spirit felt strangely lighter. I learned later that Martin and Gloria were packing up to leave, looking relieved. Gloria told me over a quick goodbye that she hadn't heard or seen anything else that night. I merely nodded, not trusting myself to speak of my experience. Troy also prepped his guitar and thanked me again for the battery charger. He looked worn out but calmer, as if some intangible tension had lifted. Nobody had any fresh horrors to report. I swung by the ranger station to return my campsite permit and told Josie I was leaving too. She studied my face intently, then asked, "Did you see her?" All I could do was nod. She searched my eyes for a moment, then gave a small, sad smile. "Guess she found something last night. Maybe closure. You look like you found a piece of something too." My throat was tight. I exhaled shakily. "Maybe," I said. "It's hard to explain, but thank you for letting me stay." She nodded. "Safe travels, Ryan." As I pulled out of Promised Land State Park in my creaky old Winnebago, the morning sun cut through the thinning clouds, igniting the wet leaves with fresh brilliance. I felt like I was emerging from a long, dark tunnel. The heartbreak that had led me here still existed, but something had changed. My pain was no longer an endless void, but a valley I could navigate. Perhaps that lost girl's spirit reflected my own sense of being adrift, of searching. I'd looked into the face of sorrow made manifest and offered the only gift I had, empathy. I drove onward, uncertain of my next stop. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, I imagined, just for a split second, a small figure at the edge of the trees, watching me leave with a gentle smile. Then I blinked, and it was gone. Whether it was real or a trick of my imagination, I felt a gratitude well inside me. Gratitude for the chance to say goodbye, not only to the sad ghost of Emily Parker, but to my own anchor of grief. They call it Promised Land, and perhaps that's exactly what it was, a place where old wounds and lingering spirits could find release. Even now, whenever I think of that silent lake, I recall the swirl of pale lights, the hush of the pines, and the final whispered words of a lost child. Yes, it was terrifying. Yes, it was surreal. But in some strange way, it was also a promise that healing, while elusive, is possible, even if it wears the face of a ghost in the moonlight.